So I could see a lot of disparity in terms of understanding the longing for dignity and the worldview that either informed the basic ideas to what the foundation of that dignity was, or it did not. So I could, growing up in India, I could see a kind of like people where the longings were not conforming with their lived experiences. There's a huge, the whole system was built on a hierarchical system. At the same time, in terms of longing, in terms of the question about justice and equality, were more aligned to the Western idea of what dignity stands for. And I saw that also in Africa. I saw that in the Gulf region, where I lived for some time, and I got really intrigued by that. And I said, okay, let me do my dissertation on that topic. So I did a study on the Hindu understanding of human dignity. I did not do a comparative study. I did a pure grounded theory based on the Hindu way of life. So there's this idea of homeomorphic equivalence as to how we understand dignity in different cultural contexts. In the Eastern context, based on the worldview that informs people's public behavior, there is no, even, you'll be surprised to know, even within our language, there are over 2,200 languages in India. And of that, there's not a single language, local language, that has a term that would signify the same term, dignity, as we understand here in the West. There is for respect, there is for honor, but there is no term in Indian languages for dignity. There are proximate words that would, but when I'm talking dignity, the very understanding of dignity being inherent. The intrinsic worth of individual, because that is not available within the whole worldview or the framework within which people situate themselves in. So yeah, that got me intrigued. So I took that as a topic for my dissertation. And even I'll talk about that today in the presentation, how we need to also see this idea of human dignity from a cultural perspective as well, while it has to have a foundation that would inform it. So yeah.
Great. So I guess you could just start now. It's 6:06. We have some students in here now. So
okay, great. I really wish we had an opportunity to actually be in a classroom and do this. I'm going to miss that, but I'm also thankful for this medium of internet and be able to actually do it over Zoom. And as you can tell, I'm Irish. I'm just kidding. As you can tell, I was telling a little bit about my background. I'm from India. I grew up there in a completely different cultural context. And I was talking about the interest that I had in doing a PhD on the very topic of human dignity that I'm going to talk about today. Now, as we all know that, and you might have guessed by now that I might be speaking from a point of human exceptionalism, and which I don't want to hide that. That's the point I'll be speaking from, because I understand that there is some value to that. So what I want to do is actually, I think we have time until 8, and I really respect the fact that today you chose to be here than to be watching the presidential debate. So it's a real honor that you all are here. And I think we'll have some discussion time at the end, about 45 minutes or an hour. We can leave early if you want to, if you won't have any questions for me. But I hope to actually have this presentation for about 45 minutes and yeah, open it up for discussion. So I'll really appreciate if you'll either write your questions while you're listening to me in the chat box, and I think Jane is going to moderate that later. And I want to come from a position where I would say that I'm not a philosopher per se. So I won't be touching on the philosophical aspects of understanding human dignity, but more from a theological and also a cultural basis of it. So speaking a lot from experience as well, and seeing what I've seen around the world, how this idea has worked out for the good of the majority. And I won't be making a claim that it has always worked out well for all cultures, because I've seen consequences, negative consequences of adopting a foreign idea and imposing it on a culture which didn't have a foundation or the worldview to adapt that concept within their framework. And that has done some damage, but not a lot, but has done more good than damage. So, so I'll start by saying this: one of the urgent questions facing our 21st century, and we can all agree on this, is that what does it mean to be human? You know, the very biotechnological advancement that we are seeing in particular is challenging us to redefine the very human nature, and in its extension, human dignity, all in the name of either progress or for the welfare of the people. And the current political system, as well as the social upheaval that we are seeing, is also making us reevaluate what constitutes our notion of humanity. However, in the midst of all these challenges, human dignity remains one of the prominent ideas discussed and fought for in almost all domains of our collective enterprise. So if we talk about politics, bioethics, education, justice, if you listen to any politician today, I can guarantee that out of 10 speeches that they have given, of that at least 6 or 7 would have this term human dignity somewhere in their speech. It remains a consciously experienced idea. And not just that, it is also basis for social consciousness as well. An idea that has somehow evolved into a self-evident idea. Now you may wonder, what am I saying when I'm saying that? What does it mean that it has become a self-evident idea? Because as I said, I come from the perspective of human exceptionalism, and I'm speaking as a Christian here today. So I don't hide the fact that I believe in the idea that humans are positioned in a place that is special. Doesn't mean that being special wouldn't come with responsibility. But at the same time, it is an idea that a Christian would claim to be a part of revelation. And if it is a revelation, it can't be self-evident. If it was self-evident, my argument is also this, that every culture would have had it. Every worldview would have sold this idea of equal dignity or intrinsic worth of individual. So when the framers or the founders of this nation were saying self-evident, it was, I think, more oriented in terms of future, in terms of accepting it as given that we all are created equal. So starting from that premise, let me now share the screen, and we can start. I'd like to start my presentation here. Here we go. Let me know if you're able to see it and if it's clear. Okay. So what is it that, what do you mean? What do we mean by human dignity? That's the basic question that we have when we're talking about it. So let me set up a little bit of foundation. I'm going to talk about the cultural aspect of it, pointing to the very fact that we have, that we can see in constitutional laws, how this play out. And also then from there into an understanding of intrinsic dignity, why we need to actually appeal to the intrinsic worth of an individual to even substantiate this very idea for any purpose. So there are different definitions being given. They are not conclusive definition. These are not the definition that everyone would agree with. So let me just read some of them. This is by Matt Lebeck. Human dignity is the fundamental value of human being. A Cristiano says to say that something has dignity is basically to recognize that it has a certain kind of value. Dignity is the property of a thing that grounds what is owed to. Or as per Harvard, dignity is the particular cultural understanding of the inner moral worth of human person and his or her proper political relation with society. Now, there might be differences in terms of understanding what dignity is, but there is a common consensus among those who would hold it as valuable concept or notion. They would say that dignity can be debased, but it can be effaced, but it cannot be lost. In one sense, dignity can be debased, violated, but it cannot be annihilated. From a biblical standpoint, a Christian would say that a dignity is basically necessary, essential, and intrinsic value having an objective reference. It is inherently sacred, not accidentally sacred. It is not dependent on the opinion of the other. as to what this value or worth is. Now, as I said, not everyone would agree that this is an important notion, and I do recognize that. Some would say that it's a mere rhetorical dressing or a simple slogan. Ross and Fuller suggest that there is no distinctiveness of humans, basically. Ethicist Peter Singer would actually point at me, if he's in my presence, he would call me a speciesist. Basically, he would say that human dignity regards the exclusion of animals from the notion of, our understanding of dignity is limited in that we only think that it's limited to human beings, and therefore it is problematic. Cognitive psychologist Stephen Pinker, who wrote an article called Stupidity of Dignity, which you can actually find it online, says dignity is basically an imposition of a Catholic agenda on a secular democracy. And we'll look into that more in a minute. So in my understanding, the basic issue with dignity is the issue with definition. So, or understanding what dignity is. If you talk to people in general and talk to them in terms of the ideas that they hold or they have around their worldview, I can not assure you, but I can at least come to a valid conclusion that most of those ideas would not deny the fact that dignity does something, that we all long for dignity, that we all desire to be dignified in some way. So there's a confusion in terms of what dignity is, but there is a consensus, major consensus or majority consensus in terms of what dignity does. Its intrinsic meaning has to be left to intuitive understanding, conditioned in large measures by cultural factors, which is something that we actually miss out when we talk about human dignity, the very cultural aspect that helps us to understand this important notion. So how should we approach dignity? I think we should do it with the help of comparisons, analogies, and examples in an intuitive manner. Dignity is not an empty idea. Rather, it is too rich to be limited within a precise definition. If dignity refers to the unique value of every human being, how could such uniqueness be defined, says Adorno, right? Think about this. And I'm quoting him here. Definitions are a way of generalizing, whereby we try to gather the properties that are common about a thing that needs to be defined. However, definitions are limited in covering what is unique and irreplaceable. This is precisely why it is difficult also to define human dignity, which concerns not with abstract human entity, but to a concrete human being with flesh and blood, right? So when we define something, think about this, the terms like equality, liberty, and justice, complex concepts. There is no common consensus regarding their content, underlying rationales and results, right? So, but no one questions the idea of equality. No one questions the idea of liberty, but we don't confine it within just one acceptable definition always. It is against the logic to limit a universal principle, a transcendent idea within the framework of time and space. Now, you may be aware of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. It appeals to this idea of dignity. And one of the framers, Jacques Maritain, when he participated in drafting this and responding to a public astonishment that a people of radically opposed views, when nations came together, they were formed on the basis of different worldviews. They're holding different worldviews, but they all agreed on rights when they came together in the United Nations and signed this declaration. Maritain liked to say, yes, we agree about the rights, but on condition that no one asks us why, right? We agree on the condition. So basically the thing that we agree on what dignity does and it can do, but until you don't ask us what it is. So with regards to dignity, when I'm making a claim for intrinsic worth of individual here as a foundation for dignity, we need to understand that dignity is a concept that needs to be understood in terms of paradoxes, right? With certain reality within which we live. One is dignity is understood in terms of praxis over theory. I'm not saying theory is not important, it is necessary. No one would say that I want to be indignified in any form. Culturally, no matter what culture you go to, there's this concept of dignity or dignifying the other or being dignified by other. So it is always understood also in terms of ex-negativity approach. Basically, the idea is that when indignity happens, we understand what dignity is, right? When we see indignity, we know what indignity or what dignity is. And also dignity is understood only in light of human vulnerability. And we'll touch on this a little bit more when I'm going to talk about the Christian idea of being humble under the sovereignty of a God, an ultimate reality who informs, or the very idea of imago Dei. And I'm going to come to that in a while. And also in terms of the technological mastery that we are facing in front of us today, human nature is being redefined. And it is creating some sort of contrast between that which lies ahead of us and who we are. And that reflects in terms of the value of this very notion of human dignity. Now, human dignity is a foundational concept. We need to understand that. Those who are arguing against dignity, right, the foundations of dignity would mostly agree in terms of dignity as foundation. It is a mother right to a lot of daughter rights, legal instruments that we have. We talk about different rights that individuals are inalienable rights that they have, right? But we can have that dialogue or interaction when we actually are also able to justify as to what it is founded on. And I'm arguing that it is founded on the mother right, which is the human dignity of an individual. Now, there are three models to basically understand human dignity. One is theological model, philosophical model, and a constitutional model. I'm not going to touch, as I said, on a philosophical model. There's not enough time for that. But I'm going to touch on the theological model a little bit and also constitutional model. Now, you may ask, why am I doing constitutional model? Now, I'm going to talk about different cultures here, right? And you may ask, what is the evidence that we have of dignity being borrowed as an idea into constitution? If you look at 90% of the world's constitution today, they have this, even including Indian constitution, in the very preamble, we have borrowed this term, and I'm saying the term borrowed, with this idea of dignity being intrinsic into the constitution. So there is evidence for it, not just experience based on what I'm going to say, what I have experienced in my nation, India. Now, how it has come about in its modern form, if you see from the classical times to our modern times, there have been different ideas of understanding dignity, but they were all limited in terms of dignity for some. There was no precise idea of dignity being universal and open for all to be participating in that. There was cosmocentric framework of dignity, like Cicero on the nature of dignity, being that we are part of this cosmic reality, and that's what gives us dignity. Thomas Aquinas talked about, in relativity to God, the Christocentric idea of framework of dignity, and then Kant on the idea of reason, pure reason, basically, not just reason that we know something, but we know that what is right and wrong, pure reason. And then on the idea of being limited within a polis, a polis-centric idea, or based on social acceptability within a community. I'm not going to dwell much into that. I can share this PowerPoint if you want me to, and you can look into it more. I've even written the authors and given you the reference at the end as well, so that'll be helpful. So let me jump on to the very constitutional idea of dignity, and this is important. And in my reading, in my research, it was very clear that human dignity has long existed as a moral, philosophical, and religious concept. It has biblical roots in the Judeo-Christian tradition, as well as in Stoic anthropology and the Roman common concept of dignitas. The documentary history or tradition of the West is infused with the idea of dignity, starting from Magna Carta, French Declaration of Man and Citizens, to the US Bill of Rights. It is very much present in those documents, if we see, even if within the American Constitution, it is not mentioned directly, the term human dignity in the Constitution, but it appeals to it in the fact that we all are created equal. Now, human dignity entered modern global constitutional history in an unexpected place and at a surprising time in Ireland in 1937. And it was canonized in the form of a religious constitutionalism. And let me jump onto that. And this will come as a surprise to some of you, maybe, I'm not sure. But this is what the preamble of Irish Constitution of 1937 says. In the name of the most holy Trinity, from whom all authority and to whom, as our final end, all actions both of men and states must be referred, we the people of Eire, humbly acknowledging all our obligations to our divine Lord Jesus Christ, who sustained our fathers through the centuries of trials. Let me jump onto the latter paragraph. And seeking to promote the common good with due observance of prudence, justice, and charity, so that the dignity and the freedom of individual may be assured. Now look at this. This was part of the very constitution that was framed, right? And this is prior to the World War II that basically brought about the United Nations and the formation of other nations, including India in 1947 in a decade, and how India adopted and other nations adopted this concept of dignity within their own constitution and applied it in their own context. So let me jump to this. So look at this list if you're able to, the nations, some of the nations like 2002, the Article 1 of German Federal Republic, Pakistan, Russia, Iraq, Turkey, Iran, all these nations, including Iran, has adopted some notion of dignity within their constitution, within how they, the civil government brings about the whole aspect of rights to its citizens. 90% of the constitution written since World War II alludes to some idea of dignity within their constitution, either in general reference in the preamble or human dignity as a right in and of itself, guarantee of dignity in relation to arrest, detention, and the criminal process, guarantee of dignity in relation to labor, working condition, or economic policy. So what I'm saying is that this concept is not a trivial concept, a concept that's been just adopted into their constitution just for the sake of it. These nations have found it valuable, something that the West had, which they had a vacuum for in their own context. And when the right time came, they adopted that into it. But the question remains, do the worldview, the majority of worldview that guides the public behavior and framework or mindset of the public or the citizen, does it substantiate, does it give it the foundation for that idea of intrinsic worth to be applied in their personal context, in their social context? Now, there are three concepts of dignity used by constitutional courts. Inherent dignity, as you may know. First, in its most universal and open sense, dignity focuses on the inherent worth of each individual. Such dignity exists merely by virtue of a person's humanity, right? Intrinsic dignity is a presupposition of human equality. Each person is born with the same quantum of dignity. Inherent dignity does not establish an external measure for what counts or being dignified or worthy of respect. Inherent dignity focuses on human potential. Now, this is important, right? I hold this idea that we don't have to leave aside the idea of potential. So I'll make a composite claim for inherent dignity, and I'll make a case for that. Inherent dignity focuses on human potential, not the exercise of such potential. Those are two different things, right? Being human and being able to exercise being human are two different categories. But when we talk about human dignity, it is not on the exercise of such potentials, but on the fact that they have the potential to be human. Inherent dignity is pluralistic and remains neutral about different conceptions of good life, right? And I believe inherent dignity requires such transcendent justification or motivation, of which the most common and perhaps the most logical is the belief in the existence of God. Dignity radiates from within and not about external propriety. The second is that of substantive value. And I'm going to talk about the image of God, the concept of imago Dei, and we'll come across this very term again, substantive value. And as I said, I'm not making a one-sided case. I'm making a composite case in terms of why inherent dignity cannot be just understood in terms of being made in the image of God, but also on the fact that how we are made, right, together. So substantive value is basically dignity can express and serve as the grounds for enforcing various substantive values. Unlike intrinsic dignity, substantive value of dignity requires living in a certain way. It is conditioned on something. Dignity may require behaving, for example, with self-control, courage, or modesty. Embodies a particular view of what constitutes the good life, right? For example, I don't know how many of you know this. In France, there used to be a practice of which was banned. It's called dwarf throwing. They used to throw dwarfs for the sake of entertainment. Now, in France, they banned it on the idea that this dehumanizes these dwarfs, right? But guess what? The dwarfs, because everything, their life was dependent on them, on this very profession that they were part of, they went against it in the courts. But on the basis of this idea of dignity of the collective, in a way how one has to perform or behave in a conditioned environment, this was banned. And this was the very idea of very basis on which even the ban on burqa, the covering, the Muslim women, the covering that they wear in France, why it was banned on this very premise of the idea that one has to abide by the way of the collective that is agreed upon. And the third is recognition and respect. Constitutional courts often associate dignity with recognition and respect. This dignity is rooted in a conception of the self as constituted by the broader community, right? Again, a kind of similar kind of idea. A person's identity and worth depend on his relationship to society. So let me move on to this. So when we talk about dignity, the case that I'm making is one of not either extreme, but one of not either and or, but and, in the sense that autonomy and relationality as being the obligating features of personhood or human dignity. What do we mean by autonomy? The capacity to be self-determining and not have one's life simply shaped by other person or external power, right? The very kind of idea of categorical imperative that Kant talks about, not just hypothetical imperative as to what is, but what ought to be. Relationality, the fact that persons cannot survive, thrive, or even exist as persons without some fundamental relatedness to others. Now, what happens is that, and I'm going to share a little bit of experience here as to how dignity works out in cultures and divides them sometimes as well, is cultures tend to go either extreme in terms of their emphasis, either a complete autonomy, right, or complete relationality. And they form cultures that would look like two different worlds. And within that framework, either we create a complete individualistic society or a complete collectivistic society. I'm not going to go into details because we don't have much time here. I think I have about 15 more minutes before I have to finish and open for discussion. So let me jump through. I'm assuming that you know about this already. If not, please come back and ask me more and I'll elaborate on that. And then right-based society, like in the Western context, it's a right-based society. One claims their own individual rights. There is a preference for that. The rest of the world, because being collectivistic, it is not primarily the right of the individual. It is the duty of the collective to which one conforms, in the sense that there's even a term that you may come across in the West. The term is a Hindi word called dharma. You know of karma. Karma is also a certain specific form of duty. You do something, it comes back to you. That's the Western idea of karma. But precisely, karma is connected to the idea of dharma, the idea of duty. So Eastern world, including China and most of the African nations, are duty-based society, right? Whereas in the West, it is right-based society. And then this idea of the West has adopted the idea of intrinsic dignity, whereas the rest of the world, dignity is acquired, it is graded, it is partial, it is dynamic. It's not intrinsic in itself. It is dependent on the collective. In the West, this idea of transcendent, right? The idea of covenant, in the sense that even within the American context, the very idea of constitution is based on the idea that you have a covenant with it. It's not merely a contract, right? Some may argue it is a contract, and I'm not going to against that. But at the same time, it is the underlying factor is that you make covenant with people in terms of abiding by that very system of law. It's a nation under law, right? That's why you have this idea of republic here. It's not merely democracy. The idea of republic is only justifiable if you can bring in the idea of covenant into it. You make a covenant and you come under that as a nation together, as a people. Whereas the rest of the nations, though now they want to be claimed as republic, but they function more like democracy in the sense that it's a social contract. It's the contract of the collective that you need to abide by, not just precisely because you agree with it or you submit to it willfully. And the other is that in terms of dividing societies on the basis of value and status. Value here doesn't mean, and I'm value here, I'm not saying the price, as Kant would say, right? It's more to do with something that cannot be replaced. For example, the very idea that you can't own or sell an individual because there's no price that you can come up with. If I have a phone, you can give me some value to it that would justify that I can sell it to you, right? You can't do that with individuals. And that's the value I'm talking about. The rest of the world is in terms of status. That brings you acquired dignity. You are dignified because of your status of a kind. And I can talk more about the caste system in India that works out in that way. Now, also, this parses nations on the basis of honor and shame culture and guilt and innocence culture. The West, I always say, the gift of the scriptures to the West had been guilt and innocence culture, whereas the rest of the world, it's been honor and shame culture. But you'll be interested to actually see this, that we are getting away from the guilt and innocence culture. Now, we have come to a culture here in the West, and which as a foreigner, as an alien, someone who's come from an Eastern context, I can see it automatically, that the West is becoming an honor and shame culture even more. In the sense that coming to a post-modern, post-Christian culture in one sense, we have come to a place we are questioning the very foundations of a lot of things that we held as given, right? And when that happens, what happens is that when you engage with individuals, it's no more necessarily on the basis of the ideas that we are engaging with, but we are engaging with individuals. And then honor and shame plays into that. The whole idea of shaming the other is and canceling them out. And this is something I'm speaking as an outsider, right? In an honor and shame culture, if you bring shame to someone, to the collective or to a people group, what do? You isolate them, you excommunicate them, right? And that is taking shape in the West, I believe, in the form of cancel culture, that you cancel individuals, not the ideas, because you're not engaging with ideas. You cancel individuals out. Now, let me jump to the next. So with regards to, and this is the final section, I don't have many slides now. I'll finish in maybe 10 minutes and then open it up. So with regards to the image of God, which I'm saying must be the foundation for this very idea of human dignity, if it has to actually live through this century, which I doubt. If we don't hold on to this idea of transcendence, we will actually lose out, given the way technology is progressing, given the way society is progressing in terms of its thinking. We will get away with the idea of human dignity that have been so valuable in developing nations and bringing people together. The whole idea of reaching out to the underprivileged, not to the one only that who was deserving for it, but to the one who was not deserving, bringing good to them, which I would argue is precisely a product of a worldview that was captured out of Judeo-Christian framework. So let me talk about this, the content of the image of God. Now, when we're talking about human dignity, within the concept of imago Dei, we need to understand that it works so well is because of these two concepts working together. One, that as a Christian, I believe in the scriptural mandate, or the Genesis mandate given to man, and the way man was created. He was created in a place of elevation, that we are no accidents of history. We've been created with a purpose, created with a responsibility towards the creation. So we have this elevated position. At the same time, we are created under the sovereignty of God that has to keep us humble, right? So humanity in the image of God must exist in this paradox at all times. So when a Christian says that, yeah, we are created to have dominion over everything, they're not saying that anything goes. That's not what they're saying. What they're saying is that they have been given this elevated position in creation with responsibility towards the creation, because we remain humble under the one who is sovereign. So what happens after that is, let me jump onto this one. So when we talk about the image of God on individuals, we are not merely talking about the ontology, that we are representations of God here, that we have these characteristics, we have rationality, we have, yeah, which is true, we have all those things, but we are also saying that we are representatives of God. It is also based on function, not just the substantive aspect of it, that we have rationality, we have creativity, we have dominion. That's not the only thing. It goes along with the idea of functionality, as to we are being created for a purpose that obligates us as an obligated feature for personhood. Now, one of the important aspects of the idea of image of God, there are different explanations of it. As I said, some would side with the idea that we are rational being, therefore we are made in the image of God, or we are creative beings, the spiritual and psychological, right? But it has to, and this is the case I'm making, that it has to go with the relational aspect of being human beings. If God exists, and if he has created everything, because that's not the question we are dealing with here right now, right? I'm taking it as given that God exists. If he does exist and he created human beings, right, with these faculties, there is, from a Christian perspective, when we talk about imago Dei, it also includes the relational aspect, human beings in special relationship with the creator, right? The functional aspect of human beings that calls them to be image bearers, so they can actually fulfill the responsibility given to them. Now, Gary Fergeron points out that the doctrine of imago Dei was formative in shaping Christian views of humanity, ethics, and ministry. First, the doctrine gave impetus to Christian charity and philanthropy, just as concern for the poor was an important feature of the Hebrew scripture. So charity and compassion were regarded as manifestation of Christian love. Walter Stroff calls it the quartet of vulnerable, widows, orphans, resident aliens, and the impoverished. Injustice is seen both as wronging God and as wronging the victims of injustice by failing to recognize their inherent human worth. Second, the doctrine of the image of God provides the ground for the belief that every human life had intrinsic value as bearers of God's image and the object of redemption through Christ. Third, Christians' understanding of imago Dei gave Christians a new perspective on embodiment and human personality. Both Greek ascetics and later the Gnostics showed no admiration or concern for the body. On the contrary, they despised it, looked forward to a day when they would be released from its prison. The image of God, especially as reflected in the incarnation, gave rise to the notion of more integrated body and soul. Finally, the doctrine of the image of God led to a redefinition of the poor. The human body in all its parts shared in the divine image, argues Fergeron. This was true of everyone's body, not merely those of Christians. Now, let me share a little cultural aspect here. This notion is important because if you see, you can divide two worldviews, right? One on the one side, and they both have some sort of categorical imperatives, if I can borrow that term from Kant. in the sense that what ought to be done. Uh, from the biblical standpoint, you can point to this idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? Which is a proactive idea of doing unto others. It's a call to engage with the world that's been given to you. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Whereas if you look at rest of the worldviews, you would see that it's on the negative. Do not do unto others as you don't want them to do unto you, right? And this very framework of the idea of who the human person is defines that worldview of being proactive. And this is the very idea of being made in the image of God that made Christian worldview so effective around the world and the difference that it has made, including in the nation of India, where I come from. Now, I can come to this maybe later during our discussion in terms of understanding now, if God has created us, he has to be a certain kind of God to have created us for us to even claim human dignity, right? And I can come to that later, but let me jump onto this and get into our discussion. What I believe is that human dignity or longing for dignity is another transcendent category that a Christian has or is available among all people, just like longing for God, longing for meaning, longing for purpose, longing to know where we come from, longing to know where we are heading. I believe longing for dignity is one of those transcendent categories being that we long for, something that we desire for, regardless of whether we find justifiable foundation for it or not. This is what St. Augustine said, you have made us for yourself and our hearts are restless until they find rest in you. God has instilled in human hearts the intuitive desire for the things that are best for them, of which is dignity. And let me end with this. And I mentioned, if you have looked into the life of Christ, if you have not, please look it up. Just open any gospel. And I want to actually give you a new lens to look at Christ. Look him through the lens of dignity. Now, I don't know if you're aware of these stories that are visible on the slide, but let me just point to one or two. One is the very first miracle that Jesus is known for, turning water into wine. Now, if you understand the context of an Eastern context of wedding, where the dignity of that family is dependent on how well that wedding is conducted. So in that act of converting water into wine, Christ is not merely just doing a miracle, because we miss out on this aspect of he basically dignifies that family in the context in which they were, right? He maintains the dignity of that individual. Likewise, in the example of the demon-possessed man who had legions within him, and how Christ sets him free. And scripture says that these demons basically went into the swines and they jumped into the water and drowned, right? Here also we see that what Christ is saying is that he's making a point, if you see it through the lens of dignity, that this man's worth is much more than these thousands of pigs that you're crying for and willing to actually kill this man or basically blame him or even Christ for what has happened. So throughout the scripture, if we see, Christ is the dignifier, the ultimate dignifier that we find in everything that he does. Now, certainly we cannot say that all Judaism or Christianity has supported human rights, right? It has been key minority traditions that have argued their case over long periods of time and become more widely accepted. Nor can we say that even these traditions have been faithful to the implications of their own heritage at all times. And the horror stories of our past also have been told to mitigate any temptation to triumphalism. Still, intellectual honesty demands recognition of the fact that what passes as secular, Western principles of basic human rights develop nowhere else than out of key strands of biblically rooted religions. And while many scholars and leaders from other traditions have endorsed them and found resources in their own traditions that point to quite similar principles, today these views are under suspicion, both by Asian leaders who appeal to Asian values and by some communitarian, and postmodern philosophers in the West who have challenged the very idea of human rights. The deepest threat comes from those intellectual leaders who have adopted anti-universalist, anti-principle perspective, Professor Matt Stackhouse. It is true, right? Christians have not always been perfect in terms of actualizing these principles, or the West has not always been perfect in actualizing this principle. Doesn't negate the fact that these are valuable principles that needs to be followed. Today, the concept of human dignity has become ubiquitous to the point of cliche, a moral trump frayed by heavy use. John Wett says this, a general principle harried by constant invocation. Now, I like the response that Ben Mitchell gives to this argument that we need to cease or invoking the idea. The solution is not in ceasing to invoke the idea, but to reinvigorate its meaning and use. And I hope that we'll be able to do that. And I hope today's presentation is going to help you in some way to revive or reinvigorate the meaning of this very concept, which is so valuable, that has preserved many civilizations that are forming today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. I'm going to have Sarah moderate. So if you guys have any questions, you could put them in the box. Or if you guys just want to have a discussion, we could do that too.
I'm okay with the free-form discussion if that works for everyone.
Yeah. So Jacob, do you think you could unshare the screen so we could
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
both faces?
Let me see everyone.
There you go.
Hey, there you are. Thank you for coming in. That was very, very thorough, and I appreciate the background and the historical perspective that you gave us. I'm trying to think if anything stuck out to me. Anyone can jump in, by the way. I'm still like thinking it through.
Okay,
oh,
someone is asking.
There's a question here.
Someone is asking if there's any source that I can recommend. Yes, I do have a list on my slide, which I can show again or share again once we are done. So you can actually take a screenshot or something, or I can even email it to you if you want to read some resources on it.
Hey, while they're coming up with questions, just want to say I appreciate it. And just on Ben Mitchell that you quoted there, just a shout out to him. He's a really good dude, and one of my profs for my bioethics studies that I was doing for my PhD stuff. So wow. You know, he just retired too. So just found that out.
What
so,
a privilege.
Anyway. Good guy. Yeah, oh yeah, he's a fabulous guy. Anyway, just thought a little shout out to that small world thing. I dig the quote from him.
Yeah. I had a question, unless Alberto, do you have a question? I see you're off. Awesome. My question is, can you parse out a little bit more for me the difference between this transcendent or the covenant versus the social contract? Because from my understanding of like, I'm getting covenant. I would like some distinction between covenant and social contract, because both seem to be like buying into a kind of set law or like set creed. So yeah, I don't know if that question is clear enough, but
it is, and I'll try my best to actually respond to that. So when I'm saying covenant, I'm not in the sense like completely. I was focusing more in terms of the emphasis, right? So in the Western context, we wouldn't say that we wouldn't have anything to do with social contract. I mean, that will be a denial of the fact that we do have certain social every culture does. Every community where 2 or 3 people gather, they have social contract in some sense about certain issues. So what I'm saying is in terms of this idea of, it's a willful engagement of people, right, with certain sets of ideas that enables public behavior. Why do we think people should actually commit to a common telos, let's say as a nation, right? Why do you think we should actually subscribe to the idea that a nation must have a constitution that we must abide by? Now, this idea, this American idea, I shouldn't call it American idea, but the idea of we the people, for example. How do we get to this we? How do we get to this we? If it is merely on the basis of convenience. And I do understand that if you talk to, I don't know about the statistics about this, but throughout cultures around the world where constitutional system is established, you can definitely find people who would object to constitutions, like it's happening in India, on this very question of constitution that looks more Western than Indian, right? The Indian constitution would not have, majority of Indians would not have adopted if it was informed by a Hindu theological background, on the sense that this idea of dignity being intrinsic. That is not available. Dignity is something one has to acquire. Why do they say so? Because their idea of creation, it comes to the idea of creation in the sense that the biblical idea of the priesthood of believers is adopted from this fact that God, who is sovereign, who has created image bearers to reflect that sovereignty through them and represent that God, right? Onto the collective, onto. So that's why this idea that you have a president, whether you agree with that president or not, that president must abide by the Constitution. You would always point to the Constitution, not the president, right? He has to abide by, and that Constitution has to be guided by a higher authority, which we would say a nation under God, that whole idea of it. Whereas, can you do that with other worldviews? I doubt it. So you have to enter into a covenant with something that is together, right? And submit to it, whether sometimes you agree with it or not. In the Eastern context, why it is not applicable is because of this notion of, remember I was showing you a slide of oneism and twoism. The Western idea of, or Christian idea, is one of twoism. There's a distinction between the creator and the creation, right? And within that creation, God establishes an order of governance. A Christian would say the order of governance in family, in church, and state. That's why distinction between church and state is even possible. Doesn't mean that a separation of church and state means a separation between church and God and church and state, right? In the Eastern context, what happens is that when you have this idea of oneism, which is pantheism, so what happens is that you have an essence of this ultimate reality in you, which basically, it works both ways, depending on who is applying it. So what happens is that when you are part of this ultimate reality and you live in ignorance, and this ultimate reality is not personal, it is impersonal. So what happens is that under that impersonal being, you have to bring in personal gods, demiurges, to basically define a collective existence. So in the Hindu context, for example, these three are called Trimurti. Just like we have Trinity, Hindus have Trimurti: Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. And they have separate roles. And when they have separate role, and when creation happens, creation has hierarchy in it, right? Creation, not everyone is created equal. This idea that we all are created equal, we take it as given. No, it is a biblical idea, very much biblical idea that is not available in any other context. And I'll come to the Islamic context as well. So within the Hindu context, there is this idea of hierarchy. This is developed. Now, when that happens, you can't ever come to a point where you can say, or you can actually accommodate this idea of priesthood of all believers, or we the people, right? It's mostly who are the ones, like in the case of Hinduism, we have caste system. People have different castes, upper caste and lower caste. Then the one who are on the upper caste dictate as to what should come about, what should happen. And that is the exact fight right now in India with regards to constitution. They want to change the constitution because the constitution promotes the idea of we the people. But here they say that not we the people, but we the people who, a subgroup within the larger group. that has the control. They may not say it directly, but the worldview would lead to that. Now, in the Islamic context, if you see, you may say, what about Islam? You know, looks like everything is equal. I don't think that is even possible for this very fact. And I touched on this. When we talk about the Christian idea of creation, we are talking about a creation ex nihilo by a personal God, right? And we share in those personal attributes with a personal God. We are not gods, but we share those attributes, those substantive values that we have in relation to God. Now, when it comes to Islam, theologically, they have a problem. Now, the problem is this, because you can't say Allah is a person. That will be shirk. That will be blasphemy to say that Allah is person. And to even say that you have an image of God on you by Allah would be even more blasphemous claim to make. So in that regard, so if you travel or if you've lived in Muslim countries, which I have, India is the second largest Muslim populated country in the world, and I have lived in the Gulf countries, though people may want to promote this, there are over 100 different sects in Islam itself, right? And you have to actually live among the people to even see how this idea of dignity works out. It's always graded, it's always hierarchical. It's different from what the scripture, the Bible would promote in terms of dignity being equal, that even we can sit together and talk at the same level, not judging each other on the basis of what we do or how we do it, but on the basis of who we are. So the idea of collective, I was talking in terms of like we the people, you can't merely come and say that we are here all because there's a construct. You may have the construct, but what is it that keeps the people together to abide by that construct is the idea of covenant. I hope I made it clear. I said it too much.
No, that was wonderful. I have follow-up, but it seems like Alberto does as well. Alberto, do you have questions?
Yeah, I was curious about that same exact slide, actually. There was like a number of key differences that you were talking about for how the idea of dignity presents itself within different cultures. And I have to say that at least from my perspective in the US, this is probably not true of like all the West, but I think in the US, we absolutely don't view dignity as intrinsic. I think that there's a lot of the way that we structure our society is very hierarchical and does treat some people as if they have little to no dignity. And there's also not like the other thing is on the idea of value versus status. I do think we definitely have status in the US, which is inextricably tied to that value. They seem, at least from my perspective, because this is the only country that I've lived in. From my perspective, those seem interchangeable. When somebody is seen as valuable, that it also ties directly into their status within our scope. And I understand that the idea is not to say that people or societies or countries are perfect and that they always do the right thing. But what I would I'd say that my question is, at what point do you take, because I like the idea. I like the concept of human rights is a very good thing in my opinion, and I like the things that we say we believe in, so to speak. But my question is, at what point do you look past what people are just saying they believe in, or what a country just says it believes in, and when do you actually look at what they're doing and how much they're living up to what they profess to believe in?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question, Alberto. And this is what I would say. And let me ask you a question. So let's think through this, right? Yeah, we agree that we have this idea that underlies or that gives the foundation that we believe can give a good foundation for society to come about.
Yeah.
Now, what you touched on is the whole idea of status, the whole idea of inequality that is there. So let's understand this. So when we say we all are created equal, would you equate that with the idea that we all are equal? Or are there two different categories?
No, I would say that that's, there's a reason they said created equal. So yeah, I would say that
so
it's an important
we are created equal. Would that mean, sorry, you actually froze in between. I couldn't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I would say that, well, there's a reason that they included the word created there. So there is a significant difference in that sense.
Yeah. So I think, and that's what I think we need to work with. And that's something very beautiful distinction that must be maintained, and one that we tend to fail to actually maintain, even in our cultural context today that we are seeing. That when we assume that we all have equality, we then jump onto the other assumption that therefore it should mean that we should all be equal in all our status, all our.
Oh, I don't mean that like it's something wrong that not everybody is exactly perfectly equal within a society. Yeah. I mean, I understand that that's just not realistically what's going to happen. What I'm mostly getting at is the fact that in the United States, some people are basically treated as if they have no dignity whatsoever, like no intrinsic value. People's, in many ways, through the way that we handle housing, healthcare, all sorts of things. There are many ways in which, basically, if you are not, if you are poor, if you are sufficiently poor, you're basically treated as if your life is disposable. Governments and corporations can. Is that
in all cases? Is that in all cases?
I can say that, well, no, there are cases when poor people are treated as if they have value. Sure. But I mean, if a, country is going to say, we believe humans have intrinsic value, well, my point is that anybody can say they believe in things. At what point do we examine?
As a Christian, as someone who says, and I'm someone who would like to actually see all, like my background is also in international development. So I studied economics and the impact of worldviews on economic factors and things like that as well. And this is what I would say. One of the things as a Christian, one of the postures that I personally adopt when it comes to a society, when it comes to cultures as well, and you may all disagree with me here, or that's absolutely fine, but this is something that I have based on my experience I'm speaking, and I think there is some truth to it as well. It is important to necessarily see cultures in trajectory. There are different cultures in different trajectory, right? So I hold to the idea of incrementalism, the idea that we are incrementally reaching somewhere, right? There's a Christian understanding of it. There's a Christian understanding of eschatology as to where this is going to end, and at the end, what's going to happen, different positions on that as well. So even everyone, whether you are a secularist, whether you are an atheist, whether you are a Hindu or a Muslim, everyone has an eschatology, right? So we have to, as a Christian, I'm speaking as a Christian, I would see society on the basis of incremental progress. So even when Jesus was asked about the kingdom of God, there were two examples that he gave. One was the kingdom of God is like a yeast, right? What does yeast do? If you have a dough and you put yeast, it expands, right? And the other picture was one of a seed that you sow the seed and it turns into a tree and it flourishes, it grows. So it's always a picture of an incremental picture of human history. And this is why I'm so much personally for technological advancement, right kind of advancement, the need for biblical ethics to inform technological advancement, because this is ultimately, it fits into that notion of incrementalism. So when I'm saying that, even with regards to nation, as you agreed that this notion of dignity is fundamental, it is good, it is needed and necessary.
Yeah.
Our task, and you're right, our task is that to identify where is it that we are failing, where is it that we are doing wrong, and what is it that we are doing.
Well, let me see if I understand what you're saying. Is that we have an ideal that we've created for ourselves, some time ago, whether it's a theological or philosophical basis, that we don't live up to now, and we weren't living up to at the time that we made it. But our society is pointing itself towards that goal and moving towards that goal. And we should not only be judged on where we are, but also how far we've come. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, definitely, as a society, we have to aim towards that, which is
true. Is that what you mean by incrementalism? Is what I'm asking.
I would personally agree with it.
My issue with that idea is that I think that it misplaces the agents of that change, as if we're all just one society, or no, we are one society, but if we're all just one group with the same interests and who are just trying to do our best, and and our failings were honest mistakes. I think that from my perspective in history, our failings were not mistakes. Our failure to live up to our professed notion of equality was not a mistake, and it was a deliberate action by some people which benefited them to the detriment of others. And the way that, if you look at how the major ways in which this has changed, so you'd have the Civil War, you'd have the Civil Rights Movement, many liberation movements.
Alberto, sorry to interrupt you, but after you make your point, this is a great conversation, but Adriano's been waiting a while to ask this question. So once you finish your statement, we can just pause that, and we can maybe go back to it after Adriano's. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
So Alberto, so this is what I would say. I think it's not what I'm saying that it's a mistake. And that's something that you would say that I don't know. That's how you understand.
I'm sorry
that.
if I mischaracterized.
So I'm not saying it's a mistake. The very idea that I hold to is that we are frail. We are very much capable to do evil, and we will do evil.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Having said that, all because we have the capacity to do evil doesn't justify our evil either.
Yeah.
Right? And also because we have the capacity to do evil doesn't justify the fact that we have to do another evil to justify, or another evil to actually bring about we want to, because it's not merely the end justifies the means kind of idea, right? In the sense that, so what I'm saying is that we don't have to dismantle the foundation, a good foundation.
I don't think so
either. Right?
I don't think so either.
So I think we both agree on that. Yeah, so we both agree on that. Yeah, we both would agree on that foundation, and here that's what we're doing today. We're talking about the foundation, the biblical foundation that is being offered for a flourishing society, and one of which is the idea of inherent dignity of individuals. Because if you get away from that, right, I'm not saying that we can't violate that very principle. We have done that, and we should mend it. We should change that.
Yeah,
we should improve on it. But it's an incremental process, and we can't guarantee that in future we will not violate this very principle. We might do it, but let's hope not that we are not doing it. So that's where we need to come together and guard this important concept that there is a fight against. So that was my argument.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Adriano, what's your question?
Hi, JD.
Hi, Adriano.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is the notion of dignity is like it's interesting because I'm wondering why we even cared about it in the first place. I mean, we're humans from the very beginning. This is maybe getting into a psychological or philosophical question. Like, do we feel like an intrinsic lack of dignity, and so like do we cling on to it as if it were a possession? Because the second we like it's kind of like the second we offer love first to someone else, we make ourselves vulnerable, and so so we cling on to it because there's something to lose, as if we need to protect our face, our pride, and could that be the explanation for the advent of religion and things like Christianity teaching people, hey, love is not yours per se, but it is, you know, it is God's or from someplace else. And so if people treat you badly for your for showing your good gestures, don't take it personally. That's you know, all the pain is more towards God itself. But then all of that implies that maybe people from the beginning just don't feel like an intrinsic sense of worth. Is that kind of making sense?
So the question is like, so this is what I would say. We can either see our lives to have no worth, or we can recognize the fact that we do, right? And when we live in a collective enterprise, and as a Christian, this is what I would say is that the idea of dignity is not an end product of the religion called Christianity. From the very beginning, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you see from the very beginning, when we speak from Christian perspective, it's right in the Genesis that we have this notion of being made in the image of God, right? Right in the very beginning, that God is the one, on the fact that He's created us, endows with certain responsibilities towards the creation that He's given. So from a Christian perspective, as a Christian, I would say that it would not make any sense as a Christian for me to actually appeal to something that emerged out of, as part of our evolution, right? Part of something. So I hold to an idea of it being a primal concept. It's the first principles on which the very fact that we have a community. That's why also important and necessary to understand is this, that when God was saying that He's created them, it was not merely Adam, or it's not merely, I mean, you take into the poetic language and everything, the Hebrew language and everything into consideration. It's not merely Adam who is being dignified or being made in the image of God. It's a composite of Adam and Eve together being made in the image of God and given, right? So if we look at that, and if you look at history, when those ideas were implemented at the right time in the right way, when adopted within the notion of what a nation would mean like and how it would function, it has always worked out good. So I would say, so the case that I'm making here is one that if you believe in Christianity or not believe in Christianity, this notion of dignity has to be founded on a transcendent reality for it to come about. Right?
Sorry, say that again. It has to be founded on a
transcendent reality for it to actually for us to even make a claim that we all are created equal and endowed with, this intrinsic worth of some kind. Or else, I mean, there is no other way. If you look at, there's no other way we can come to a conclusion that there is this inherent worth for individuals that is not replaceable by anything else.
Yeah, because it seems as if like that, well, I want to be mindful of another person's question, that in order for a person to even, let's say, make things like sacrifice or to be the one to go first in gestures of loving kindness, their sense of worth or like their feeling is I guess would be based off something transcendental or coming from a loving place, and it's not theirs to keep. Yeah, because if it was like transient, then no wonder that explains things like sin or privation,
No. So what I'm saying is this: if it is that we have evolved into thinking that we all have equal dignity, so the question would be, why do we still have cultures that don't that they don't think the same way. There are cultures, including the culture that I come from, there is no notion of we all are being created equal. It's not available, right? So if that's the case, we should have all evolved into this idea that we all are created equal, which is not the case. That's why in the very beginning, I also talked about this very idea of we all being created equal and have intrinsic worth. It's a revelation. It's not self-evident. So I don't know if you joined later, but I did make that claim in the sense that this is not a self-evident idea that we all have evolved into thinking that, no, we need dignity, right? So there is a longing for dignity, just like there is longing for justice. Like when we talk about justice, we don't say that we all actually evolved into thinking that we need justice, or we all evolved into thinking that we have to have equality, right? Whereas if you look at it from a scientific perspective or from an evolutionary perspective, we shouldn't be coming to that point. It's the survival of the fittest. We should come to a point of, that it's not that we all are created equal, it's that some has an upper hand over others, and how they use that, how they control that. It does work out in certain cultures, but what I'm saying is that this very idea of being made in the image of God, it's not that something that we could invent. It's something that is a part of revelation that even the scripture offers. And that's why I'm saying the West has borrowed it purely from the scripture. And I would actually make that claim. Even the founders of this very nation that you are part of, and I'm here now, I would say that when they said that these are self-evident, I actually kind of digress from that. And I say that if it was self-evident, it will be available in all cultures at all times, which is not the fact.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I did come in later. So yeah, I guess I'm seeing the point that it is not this notion of, intrinsic self-worth or equality. It's not it's not as intrinsic or inherent as we think. It's very much a product of, I guess, conditioning or like.
Yeah, I firmly believe that much of the good that has happened through, no matter people can talk about a lot of, if they're seeing it through the lens of colonization, then you would come to a different conclusion. But if you ask me as a foreigner, someone who has seen firsthand the work of certain missionaries who've gone from the West with this idea of intrinsic value and worth, and were able to communicate that to cultures, they were able to bring about radical impact in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of social morality, and other things, right? As I'm talking about cultures being on trajectory. So that's why the idea of intrinsic dignity of individual, I claim that on the basis of Christian understanding, and it makes perfect sense in terms of human history as to what the good that it has brought about, that it is a biblical idea, one that needs to be promoted and not self-evident.
Does anyone else have more questions? Noah or Sandy or Nikki, before we get to you all again, Alberto?
Okay.
Just want to make sure that everyone has a chance if they so desire. All right. I guess it's up to you, Alberto.
What do you think of the groundwork on the metaphysic of morals by Kant? Because that whole book is about like his attempt to actually create an a priori basis for dignity that can just come out of pure reason alone. Have you seen it? Do you have any specific
when I actually read
observations or arguments about it?
So I actually love Kant's work on that very much. And we tend to fail to actually distinguish between, because there's a lot of confusion in terms of his understanding of reason as the basis for the idea of dignity, right? And coming to conclusion in terms of how. So I'm not a philosopher in the sense that I would understand the nitty-gritty of all his arguments on that, but on this particular issue,
I don't think anyone can.
I completely agree on this, that when he's talking about reason, he is not talking about reason as an intellect to actually know something. That's not what he's talking about. He's very specific as to what we inherently know about. So that's why he uses the term pure reason. Pure reason is one that actually inherently tells you what as a Christian, I would say that God has put morality within your heart, the moral laws by which we all and every culture tries to abide by. By pure reason, we know what is good and evil, right? And on the basis of that, he gives us these distinction between hypothetical imperatives and categorical imperatives. And he comes to that categorical imperatives where the only thing that I would do with that is that I would go a step further and connect that same thing what Adriano was saying, that the idea that this very notion that he's saying of categorical imperatives in terms of how one has to treat the other, that they may be treated like, right? He is touching on this biblical aspect of do unto others as you have them do unto you. Exactly the same thing. But what I'm arguing is that that is not self-evident or available for all in all cultures, right? It is a biblical idea. It is an idea that is being taken into and applied onto a culture.
Well, it's not universal. I'll agree with you on that, but I would say, I was looking at this earlier. You made the distinction that at first glance, it might seem like the golden rule is just kind of something that appears everywhere in every culture and every religion, but there's a difference in that our Western Judeo-Christian golden rule is a proactive one, and that ours is not proactive.
And also one more thing I would add onto that is this, that it is universal. So if you look at the biblical idea of equality, it does not exclude the other, right? Whereas when we talk about the concept of equality, it's not equality of all. And let me give you one simple example in the Indian context, for example. And I'm not demeaning any culture here, so please hear me very clearly, right? Just I come from that culture. I love my culture. I value it. I grew up there. But I'm trying to actually understand different ideas that inform certain public behavior. So take, for example, practically, look at the concept of education. So if you look at global human history, so in terms of every culture has had educational endeavor that they have, right? Especially in the Indian civilization, we've had educational system. We had this idea of learning and innovation and everything available for centuries now. Now the question is, what is the problem then? What is the issue that when we had that and the West had as well, what is the impact of Western world on the Eastern world in terms of education? The difference is only this, that when you inquire who the education was available for and had access to. So you can definitely talk about the good, and even in terms of equality, is it equality of all people? Is it the dignity of all people? And that's exactly where Christianity has made a difference, right? So universalizing the whole idea of equality, it does not exclude, it's very inclusive. Whereas when we talk about equality in the Eastern context, it excludes.
Okay, I did have a response, but I think Adriano had a question first, so go ahead.
Yeah, I'm missing the dignity of no in and out, but as Noah made it clear last week, food. Okay. I think you just hinted at JD at the point that I was about to ask. Can the feeling of dignity be felt without having that individualistic, proprietary, very kind of almost capitalistic sense? So other countries and other religions have sponsored or have endorsed and cultivated the notion of dignity, just but it's not in that individualistic private property sense, but it's more in that collectivist social contract sense. Is that kind of where you're not where, it's not the point that you're making, but is that a little bit alluding to what you're talking about?
So what I was trying to do is actually show the distinction in terms of how things have worked out, right? We have to, so ideas have consequences. And ideas have had different consequences in different cultures. So it's not that, what I'm trying to help is that in terms of our global history, the history of humankind, as to where we're heading with all the advancement and everything that's happening and where we are today, what are the ideas that are viable in terms of the reality in which we live? So if you look at the Eastern world, much of the thinking is still on the collectivist basis. It's the good of the collective, right? At the expense of the individual right and sometimes dignity. So one has to submit their personal dignity under the preference of the collective. And the kind of culture we live in today, the kind of world that we are at, I don't think that has brought about the good that we are hoping that cultures would have. The collective good that we are hoping that everyone, we all talk about equality, we all long for equality, we all long about being just to the other. If that has to happen, it cannot happen if we are merely looking at the good of the collective at the expense of the dignity of the individual. That's what I'm making a claim. What I'm saying is that the idea of intrinsic worth of individual, not the collective, the individual needs to be maintained and kept and respected for the good of the collective as well, right? So, and there is a huge distinction there in terms of how cultures work out, how indignity happens in certain cases, right? And what you were saying, Alberto, a while ago in terms of it's a good idea, but we don't usually act upon it. We act opposite to that. And that's exactly what we need to prevent. And if we need to prevent that, we have to have some sort of foundation or principles to do that. So what I'm saying is that the scriptures offers a valid idea that would help in our human endeavor to reach a destination that we all are seeking to, which I believe we all would agree here, that which is a just society, an equal society where everyone is flourishing. It's not that some are flourishing at the expense of others.
Mm-hmm. What I was looking at earlier was is this article which has examples of things like the Golden Rule from around the world. There's one, you're right in that most of these are not proactive, but there are a few, such as this one from Jainism, the Sutra Kring. Are you familiar with Jainism?
Yes, I am.
Where is Jainism mostly practiced? It's an Indian. It is an Indian religion. Yeah. India. Okay, I was just wondering. So from the Sutra Kritanga says, a man should wander about treating all creatures as he himself would be treated. There's showing compassion to a living being is showing compassion to oneself. They mix these with the what would you call it? The passive duties, so to speak. But I am seeing an example, and I would note that it said should wander around treating all creatures, which makes it, more universal than some concepts of dignity. Probably that was probably the basis of what Peter Singer was talking about in his own critique of the idea of like specifically human dignity.
So Jainism has two sections to it as well, Digambar and Shwetambar. Right, Shwetambars are people who actually wear full white clothes, and they will cover their face, even that they may not breathe in any germs or kill them by mistake, any bugs. So they are that precise about how they follow their faith. So they have this idea of compassion towards the whole humanity. but that does not automatically translate into their responsibility towards them. It's more of non-violence with the idea of non-interventionism. It's not that you want to intervene and bring about. So the Christian idea, that's why is unique in that we are called to take responsibility towards the creation and manage it, right? That's the very term. The very term cultivate has a broader term. It's not merely that cultivate in the sense that you only cultivate and maintain things, but cultivate, the very term culture comes from the term cultivate. That's why we say agriculture, horticulture. The very term culture creation is a biblical idea as well, in the sense that you create culture, right? It's an act of moving forward. Now, Jainism is fundamentally, so Hinduism have two divisions, or three basically. Sikhism, you have Buddhism, and then you have Jainism, right? And the basic idea there is not that of, you can't even talk about dignity in Jainism in one sense, right? Why? Because dignity, when we talk about human dignity per se, we are automatically creating some sort of distinction between who we are and what is rest of the things around us.
No, I agree. You can't
have
talk
to
about
have some distinction.
Yeah, no, I agree that this idea is not anything I would call human dignity. It's more dignity of all. Well, let me not paraphrase. Of all creatures or all living beings. You're right that it's not the same idea, but I don't think we should just dismiss it out of hand for that. I think that idea as well has a merit to it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, from a Christian perspective, I would say that's why I started by saying that it is necessary for us to be in that paradox of being able to actually have some sort of elevation in terms of taking responsibility towards the nation, towards the creation that we are part of. At the same time, stay humble under the sovereignty of God. And that paradox, it is within that paradox, I think human dignity works out really well. If we go either extreme, that is when I think we can have problem. And then we would end up actually getting away from this concept and call it even stupidity, as Stephen Pinker calls it. And I think there's a huge price to pay if we actually do that. Culturally, socially, given the way we are heading technologically in terms of advancing in bioethics and with AI. And this is a real question in front of us. And as I said towards the end, this is the very question that is informing all these domains that we are engaging with currently. What does it mean to be human? And unless and until we actually have a foundation or a clear answer to, a clear answer to that question, I think anything in the name of progress wouldn't necessarily mean that it would work out good for us. So we have to actually work on this.
I can see the pragmatic approach. Like, I don't think that I'm going to, I mean, I do wear a mask when I go to a grocery store, but I don't think I'm just going to wear one 24/7 so I don't accidentally kill any bacteria.
No.
I can see the practical that there is an extent to which it's impractical, but I also don't want to dismiss it out of hand in that sense. I also don't think that, just saying, well, for example, with animal agriculture, it would be, what I hear is the argument most commonly made is that, well, it would be very inconvenient to reshape our food system and our the way that we are the way that we grow food and the way that we the way that we make things. But it's not like an argument. It's not what I would consider a valid argument against just the concept of animal rights in the first place. Like, we already have laws concerning animal rights. Like that's already something that we do acknowledge exists to some extent. And the convenience of such laws, usually laws are not, I would hope, are not made that way, or they're made on more solid bases than just like what makes everything run better or gives us the least amount of problems, you know.
And I would say, like I would mostly agree with you on that. And I would also say that it is definitely, as Christians, we got to be proactive in taking that mandate and be doing what we are called to do. And in doing that, we need to understand the responsibility given to us. And I kind of like touched on that. I mean, that can happen only when we recognize that we have a role to play in terms of how things work out in relation to us.
I got a question, if that's all right.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. You know, I can't help but ask, like, is there a slight insinuation that like Christianity was like the logical like progression on top of like the past religions in getting to this stage of individual like equality and human, you know, dignity and human rights? And if that's the case, then like the later religions like Muslim is a further like extrapolation or expansion of that. And then in the 19th century, we have like Baha'is and like other like, you know, modern religions. And I guess then the second question, would that be based off the first one? Is like the invention or the advent of religion, like just a part of the, like a stage of the greater history of humanity, cultivating greater human dignity. So, I mean, that's why we needed religion in the first place.
So let me, first of all, I would, as you can tell, I would disagree that religion is an invention in that regard. But
well, no, I'm not saying it's an invention as like, I'm not saying create invention in a trite or in a belittling way.
I understand. I'm saying like
happening.
But it is from a Christianity perspective. I would say that human history is a progressive history. It is something that, as I said, that this very notion of being made in the image of God was not a new invention that someone came about at a certain time. It has definitely been there for millennia and something that people have worked with. They have progressed in terms of their thinking about it. And I think the major difference is made at this time when with the incarnation, if we see the very person of Jesus Christ, and we were talking about this in a while, that how he personifies this very idea of what it means to be made in the image of God. It is truly personified what it means to be what the image of God looks like. That's why Jesus said that who has looked at me has looked at the Father, in the sense that how he conducted his life and what he did has dignified humankind. So in that sense, I would agree with you, right? The Stoics had this idea of dignity, but it was by dissecting the human beings in the spiritual realm and in the physical realm, and limiting it to some people, not to all people. Christianity comes along, Christ comes along, and he is there going out with the sinners. He is going out with the vulnerables. He is speaking about the Samaritan man, saving the Jewish man. So he is bringing about the very idea that God had intended for people. So when God calls out Abraham, right, when we read about in the Bible, he says, I want to bless all nations through you. God had that very idea from the very beginning, but we as people have to learn and bring that about. And I think it had been progressive in that regard. Now, on another point, I don't think it is something that we have. The second question you were talking in terms of, can you repeat that again to answer it precisely?
Well, let's say if we were born, let's say without like religions or any of that. So like with the advent of religion and like this natural longing for that, it was, I guess, the history of humanity and religions happened. Or you could even, because I'm thinking about it from an atheistic or like a secular point of view, you could even say the device of God, or in this concept of like made in the image of God, is a pretext or mechanism there to help humans evolve a higher ethic and moral standard for themselves. and for the world. But like now that we can see maybe religion even more objectively, we don't have to speak about human dignity in the parlance and the lexicon of religion, but we could talk about it in you know, in other like sophisticated ways. Yeah, so like the age of religion is we're still in it, but we don't have to use that language to talk about human dignity, even though it is built upon the great contributions of religions. Yeah.
So this is what I would say. Why would it be a problem to talk about the foundations of an idea that is good, right? And the other is that if you look at how we are progressing culturally and how things are coming about, you are right. We are actually getting away from the discussion of human dignity and all those things that's happening. But we are also facing a future by not having that in the discussion, that we are facing a future that is, and we are ultimately depending on the scientific world to tell us where they don't know where they're going. And we actually trust them on that. For example, the whole idea of chimera, right? Being genetically modified with the animal being, for example, how would that look like? We never actually stop to ask people who are working in that area, for example, what would it mean to be human in light when that happens? So say by 2045, that they're aiming that there would be some sort of mix of human beings with some sort of animal for the advancement of humankind. What would that advancement look like? How is it that we are so easy and able to actually trust on people who are offering us a telos, which they don't know what it is, in the name of progress, but we are actually comfortable to leave the foundation that offers us a free and just society? So what I would say is that the very concept, though we do see its roots in the religion, and I would say primarily the way we understand dignity today being intrinsic in the Judeo-Christian worldview, it is valuable to maintain and keep it so that we can actually work towards our own preservation as well. Because we are facing a future that no one has guaranteed us, right? We have to also assume that we are heading towards a society, heading towards a future which will automatically is going to be good for us. And that will be a pure blind trust on future or people. And I wonder why we'd be able to do that at the expense of this foundation that we have that has given. And let me also say, I'm not, I personally believe we live in a better world compared to what it was 100 years ago.
Yeah.
In many ways, not just the Western world, but the rest of the world. And one of the key ideas that has informed that is the idea of dignity of all individuals. If that is the case, why should we actually fight against that very foundation that allows human flourishing? Why can't we even accommodate? And this is what I would say as a Christian, someone who is incrementalist in terms of the progress of humankind and towards the very idea of, I don't know how much you know, but the very biblical idea of kingdom of God being, it's spreading, right? The idea. Even technological advancement is not outside of it, it's part of it. Christ not just redeems human individuals, he redeems the whole creation, right? He's going to do that ultimately as well, as that will be the eschatology that we will believe in. Having said that, so this is what I would encourage you to look into, is that we have this good foundation that is being offered to us, that we have come to, which I would argue at any time that is part of revelation, not self-evidence. But whatever way you take it, we can actually work with it, not against it, towards the future that awaits us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we're touching on that topic again of incrementalism, I think what I was going with the discussion of agency is that the progress that we've made towards this ideal of equality has always been made by the people who are being treated as unequal. They didn't just have that. It was never that the group that was not treating everyone equally just realized that they were doing evil or had some kind of change of heart. These people took their rights by force, through civil unrest all the way up to civil war. And that's why I think that that's why I think it's worth looking at, because you have the people and institutions who wrote this basis, which I don't disagree with offhand. I don't disagree with the Constitution offhand. I'm just saying that the people who wrote this basis and the institutions which profess to uphold that basis were the ones who had to be rebelled against in order to secure basic human rights for some people. And that's why I think that that sheer level of that sheer split that I see is why I think it's that you're missing a lot to only view this in an incrementalist way, and that we're just one society taking these steps forward. I see it as people being trodden upon, and the only way that changes is that they get up and force it to change. It's very much driven by the people who needed it, and
so they're fighting for something, right? So let me get on the global context and then come to the individual context that you're talking about. In the global context, we see that they've been nations colonized, right, in the past, and nations that fought against the colonizers. And guess what? At the end of the day, when they got freedom, what constitution did they adopt? And why? They adopted the same constitution that promoted the equal dignity of individuals. That the West was
because
not
they
able
were
to
actually able to actualize it, because that's not how they were being treated when they were being colonized.
Right.
Even if their colonizers said that they wanted to do that in their own country, that's great for them. But it was
so what happened was what happened was all because the colonizers were not able to rightly act upon the principles that were universal principles for the flourishing of all people. These nations did understand that even though they get free, would want to actually have those principles implemented in their nation, among their own people.
I see that.
So when I'm talking about incrementalism, I'm not saying, I'm not arguing against fight to do the good. I'm not arguing against fight to bring about, if I see indignity, there is a way to fight against that indignity, and Christ would call us to do fight that fight, right? And we must do it. By incrementalism, I don't mean that it would happen automatically and that we don't have to take care of the mistakes that we have done. Absolutely.
That's just what I want to clear up. Is that these things, if the pick any social upheaval that change. If the people who were being trodden upon hadn't done anything, women still wouldn't be able to vote. There would never have come a time when those in power would have just had some sudden change of heart. They had to be forced into it. And the same with any other, we would be sitting here in 2020, basically living with the same social hierarchy we had in the early 1800s, if it were not for that unrest. So I think,
and the fact remains that the involvement of Christians, and I'm very specific about that, involvement of Christians. So let's talk about slavery, the abolition of slavery, involvement of Christians, the right for women to vote, involvement of Christians.
I mean, there were Christians involved on the other side of all of these things as well.
Yes. So it will. That's what my last slide was about. It was about that there have been cases where Christians have not acted as Christians. But I always make sure, even in my own personal life, that I'm not looking at individuals right? Always to follow them if they're not following the ideas that they are even willing to die for or practice, right? So what I'm saying is that there's a huge distinction in terms of the ideas that we are talking about that are necessary for a flourishing society and how people act out. Definitely, I would say Christians are called to be good neighbors. We are commanded to do that. Of course. And we are commanded to love our enemies. We're commanded to love our neighbors. And that is distinct. That doesn't, I personally believe that that is so precise and unique to Christianity that it is difficult to find elsewhere, that you are called to even love your enemies, love to take care of, you're called to be loving to others and be compassionate to others, to the vulnerable. And there is always a fight against that. And I think the fight against human dignity will be a similar fight where we restrict the good that is possible, all because of what Christ has done.
I think something, JD, that correct me if I'm mistaken, but it seems also like with the example of women's suffrage, or particularly with the example of women's suffrage, that some systems make it easier or better to incrementally get closer to the right thing. Basically, like, do what they say. There are systems that more easily accomplish that over others. Like, there are other systems, other constitutions, other social contracts that don't allow that as much. And I don't know if that's something you're also saying, just with like the way America's constitution is set up, or like our political system is set up, in a way that makes that more possible. And therefore it's a good that even if like there's a bad that, the Western culture, Western colonizations have done, which like are obviously bad, there's still some goods to their system or their ideas that these other nations wanted to take after, they were able to get their freedom.
So in any kind of amendment, a policy amendment that we may bring about, right? Even with women's suffrage, if you see, there are different arguments that can be given as to why that was not allowed, and people will be justifying that. But you can come from both sides and argue on this very foundation. Say, for example, if you're talking in terms of the very dignity of women with regards to their participation in civil governments or their decision, right? So any kind of amendment that you will bring about, it's not that a nation is just set, like you are just, that there are no changes required. As the culture changes, there are a lot of things that you would change about, right? But the general equity of the laws doesn't change or shouldn't change, right? That's why it is important, and I know this is something very important discussion right now that's going on. Being originalist is necessary with regards to this. So any kind of amendment you will bring about with regards to law, it should be asked whether it violates the original intention. So in regards to the American Constitution, I'll ask, or I'll say the very idea of allowing women to vote or be involved in civil governments in terms of decision making was basically the promotion of the Constitution, not going against it, right? So with regards to any policy development, any policy change, that is the very question to be asked, and that's why it is important from my perspective, I would say, being originalist as to knowing what the founders meant by these things. And I personally believe for some reason in the world, I've studied some constitution in terms of the content of it and how it works out in societies. I find the American Constitution to be somehow divinely ordained in terms of the principles that it has. I'm not saying everyone was perfect in implementing them. Don't hear me wrong here. There have been some major mistakes that has done in terms of its implementation. But when it comes to policy changes, when it comes to implementing laws, in bringing about changes in this argument that we have to get away from the general equity of, or the original idea of this document that basically we all submit to or in covenant with, that's an important question to have. And I don't think in this question it has happened. So in that regard, and that's what nations have looked for. Even people who are fighting to preserve the Constitution in the Indian context are arguing in that same regard. This is what our founders meant when they gave us the Constitution. But these are the changes we are bringing about. Why? Right? And that's how you actually fight. If anything goes anytime, and you can redefine the constitutional ideas or the general equity of it, then in that case, where is it that you would set the boundary? So I think it's an important question. So with any kind of change of policy, any issue that we are dealing with, I would say it is again an important idea to hold on to. Does it violate the inherent worth of any individual, right? That's why it's important to define what does it mean to be human. And I was here making a case that, we can do that if we hold on to this idea that we all have intrinsic worth. And to do that, I was making a claim that we have to have some sort of appeal to a transcendent reality who would ground that fact that we all have intrinsic worth and dignity.
If I'm not mistaken, when we were talking about Kant and his groundworks, that intrinsic reality would be the aspect of human nature that he observed and drew upon for his conclusions, right?
Yeah.
My question is a transcendent reality such as specifically that one, I would say, is that necessarily religious, or is it just, well, you could observe that about any human being and then go from there?
So there is an assumption that if, say, we are discussing that very aspect, that it is fundamentally the human nature, right? That determines. There is no basis on which I can, you can say that I would agree with you, or I have to agree with you. On what basis is it that there has to be a common agreement between us, right? So I don't think, because we can have, so there are different ways in which dignity has been defined, right? On the basis of rationality, on the basis of the creative aspect of human beings, on the basis of, some Christians will say the fact that they have dominion over nature. Each of those attributes or categories, we can all disagree on, right? We can all, but what Christianity offers is, ultimately, that's why even this discussion would point to the very person of Christ, as to analyzing who this person of Christ is, what he has done, what he has represented, whose image was he.
Is he frozen for you guys or just me?
In my understanding,
there you go.
Appeal to the revelation that God offers about being made in the image of God and acting upon that.
You cut out for us, JD, just a little bit in there, but I couldn't hear the last few sentences. Do you mind repeating them really fast? And then also it's 8 and we don't want to take up all of your time. So if you also have any concluding thoughts, that would be awesome. Or if you, he's frozen for me still.
Yeah, me too.
Oh man.
His dignity is preserved. Oh man, he wanted to leave with a high mark.
Wait, he's moving.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Oh, I'm so sorry about
That's
that.
okay. No.
Yeah, what I was saying was that with regards to any external foundation that we would give, right? We have to see that if there's a point of reference that we would all agree upon, be it with creativity, be it about rationality, be it about our morality, be it about anything that we would hold on to, we can always come with examples of people not basically coming to a decision, right? There has to be consensus in regards to dignity when we talk that we have something unique about us that makes us hold on to this idea of dignity being intrinsic. So there can always be distinction. That's why I was saying that the fact that even with regards to the question of human dignity, ultimately it comes down to who Christ is and what he has done, who he is as a person, right? Who he has revealed himself to be. And from there, we need to appeal to the fact that who he has pointed us to. And from there, as very beginning, I was saying that this very idea is seen as being a revelation, an idea is revealed to us, and that we latch onto that and work from there. And as a Christian, I would say that's a good foundation to build upon, something that has worked for humankind, something that we have flourished because of, and something that we can actually, which is necessary, not just for the Western world, but for the whole world in terms of how we move forward in future. So as a Christian, I would say that looking at Christ and what he offers with regards to the idea of dignity and how he dignifies us ultimately is an important point to consider.
Are we allowed to ask something to that?
Well, that's up to you, JD. We are at 8 p.m., so we don't want to take up all your time, but if you want to still talk, I think Adriana has another question.
How about another question? Yeah, and then we can go from there.
Okay. Well, I guess that was the concluding remark. Is that kind of, you find that like Christianity is like the creme de la creme of, or without it, like the world would not be experiencing like dignity like the way it is. I mean,
hard to know, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, because like, well, when you mentioned, oh, Christianity is kind of unique in the sense of being one of the of having encouraged loving thy enemy, but like in Buddhism, like there's constant references to meeting anger and hostility with equanimity and love too. They just don't use the words like enemy. And like other closed off cultures like have existed with being able to preserve concepts of dignity and having been totally sheltered and closed off. Mm-hmm. I do agree with a lot of what you said about like human actions not manifesting like our ethical or moral teaching. That's for sure. Like our technological and behavioral actions like don't really catch up to our spirituality in practice, like for sure.
So this is what, like regarding Buddhism, you may know already this, that fundamentally Buddhism is atheistic, right?
So sorry, say that again.
Buddhism is fundamentally atheistic, right? You talk about the Theravada or Mahayana, both schools are fundamentally atheistic. There is no notion of ultimate reality being personal. You are part of, it's a cyclical existence of life. So there is no idea of ultimate reality. There is no idea of God, personal God in Buddhism. And when that's not there, the only problem that they have is that they can act on the basis of the longings that they have. So no one is saying that atheists can't be good. No one is saying that atheists can't be moral. I have Buddhist friends, I have Hindu friends, I have Muslims. They are very moral people, good people wanting to do good things. So what I'm saying is that when they do that, my question is, why do you think that is good? On what basis are we, what moral framework are we appealing to say that it is good to be compassionate to the enemy, or be compassionate to the other. And Christianity offers that, right?
I don't know. I feel like maybe I don't have to defend like Buddhism there, but like the very notion of like maybe what Siddhartha discovered in his nirvana enlightenment state, and this concept of oneness was like the evidence in of itself for the reason why like treating someone else like with your same level of dignity and loving charity is because like the other person is really you, and you are them, and like and the interdependence of the world and like the cause and effect of humanity is all like that. The Buddhist cosmology goes a lot into like explaining like these things.
And we were talking about this a while ago. So let me ask you this. Where in the world do you think Buddhism has contributed for human flourishing?
Sorry, what was the last part?
And we kind of touched on this a while ago. So the question remains, where in the world do you see that you have seen Buddhism has contributed towards human flourishing in terms of, and we can all discuss as to what does it mean by human flourishing, but we're talking in the modern context of where we live and how we are and how the world has progressed. Where in the world do you see that Buddhism and its ideology has promoted human flourishing? Siddhartha Gautama, when he left Hinduism, he left because of caste system.
Yeah.
And he adopted an atheistic worldview to basically renounce the world. And those are two different categories. And ultimate goal of Buddhism is complete renouncement. And what does it look like? So if you study Buddhism and those who actually, the ultimate goal of Buddhism is to become Buddha, that is to become enlightened, right? And the path to enlightenment is complete renouncement, no entanglement with the world. And when that happens, there is working to change anything would go against the principles of enlightenment, attaining enlightenment.
I've heard that. I really want to respect your time, so, and I don't want to come off as like an antagonist for the sake of antagonist. I've heard that I think Buddhism oftentimes gets characterized that way, as being like this concept of non-attachment or just being totally separate. It means like also like being a little maybe cold to those things, but that's not like in
exactly.
That's not what like how a Buddhist would function in the world. There's huge, like Thich Nhat Hanh is a foremost prominent scholar in Buddhism. He's a monk. He talks a lot about compassionate like Buddhism and activist Buddhism.
Yes,
as being very much part of it. So if anything, I think the concepts of attachment and non-attachment have more to do with one's like emotions and feelings and a sense of like desire and possessiveness with other people, but not to do with like being a little callous or objectively like cold towards towards your living reality.
Even I'm not characterizing every Buddhist person like that. I'm dealing with the idea. Yeah. So please don't hear me that my good friends are engineers. They have friends who are in IT sector and they're doctors. So they are very much involved in the world in which they live. What I'm saying is that if you actually bring arguments to its intended conclusions, it will lead to that. It's not that they're not acting on behalf of their longings and desire. Now, and I personally believe, fundamentally, when you actually question the desire of an individual, because ultimately, when you Buddhism, you are the desires of the individual. You have to deal with that. When you talk about attachment with God, it's a desire, right? You have to shun all your desires, which in itself is a desire, to shun your desires. If that is the goal, ultimate dealing with ideas here, right? If that is the goal, I think it only impedes our existence. It promotes a sort of isolationism, which we have seen to the point that Buddhism today has been isolated or completely gone from the place of its own origin itself. India, there is no trace of Buddhism, only here and there in one place. There is in Sri Lanka, there is in China and South Asia, Thailand. It is it is not function, it is not being useful in that regard to the society that we have come to, right? So I think with Christianity, it's not about shunning all your desires and getting away with it. It's about managing your desires towards the ultimate goal, which as a Christian, I would say is orienting all things to the glory of God. If he is the gifts and yeah, that's a discussion we can always have on
Hey, JD. JD, sorry, you're breaking up pretty bad right now in the last few sentences. Do you think you could, I don't know if you can hear me, but would you mind?
Can you hear?
Not really. No. And you're frozen.
It's ironic. His physical presence is like paralleling the concept of Buddhism fading out.
Yeah.
Adriana, you always have a joke.
Do you hear me now?
Not yet. I'm sorry, JD.
Let me connect again.
Okay.
He was manifesting the actual concepts itself. It's hilarious. You're back.
I've loved your guys' thoughts thus far, though, Alberto and Adriano. They've been really great. This has been fascinating.
You know, like a very practical Buddhist would probably say the same thing. It's not about like the complete cessation, because then that would imply like a very binary attitude toward desire. And in of itself, that is a desire, but it is also about just like acknowledging and accepting one's desires too, in the very practical way that a Christian would. Oh, and I think you had a question about like where like has Buddhism like had like an impact in helping to flourish other countries. I would say like China and the Southeast Asia, you mentioned it, in Japan are like so,
not to mention
like,
just like
they have Buddhism so embedded in their societies, and those countries have like, yeah, they're looked at as like as you could say like cliches examples of like some sort of peace sometimes in a caricaturist way.
Not to mention the effect that it had, to my understanding at least, in its place of origin, India, where it was created in rejection to the caste system, as I understand it, and its own existence helped to undermine the caste system. If I'm...
Still can't hear you, JD. Oh, you're not frozen now. Try talking.
Okay. How about that?
I just said Adriano's frozen. What'd you do to him?
Okay, is it clear now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying that, you know, just,
no. I still can't hear you, JD.
Let me do this. Give me a second.
Oh, Adriano left too. We are dropping like flies, friends.
I'm sitting on the counter.
Adriano's back.
Yeah. Something happened to my computer. Did anyone else have an issue with theirs? Never mind, it's just fine. Okay. Sorry, I didn't hear what you said when I got cut off.
How is it now? How is it now?
Great. I can hear that.
I just came out closer to the router.
Much better.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello?
Hi. I think we can hear you now.
Okay. No, what I was saying towards the end was just this, that as a worldview, given the way human history has progressed and where we are as a globalized, community of people together, in light of that, if you look at Buddhism, when the emphasis is to, which is a given fact. I mean, it's not a, I'm not in any way showing them as, or disparaging them in any way, not at all. It would make a complete sense if it had contributed in any sense towards the progress that we have seen around the world. But if we actually, fundamentally, if the worldview is based on this idea that we have to shun all our desires in order to be able to achieve the ultimate goal of that very faith that its founder mentioned, which I have personally not seen in the Indian context, where it has come to a point of complete extinction, where where Buddhism is no more in any place in terms of influence. It is only left in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, in some Southeast Asias, where we don't see it is working out the way other religions are, or the impact that other faiths are having on their culture. So that was my point. But let me also say this, that I would ask, what would a Buddhist would have to say in terms of the idea of intrinsic worth of individual? Would they have anything to say or contribute, except the fact that we have to treat equal? But why we have to treat everyone equal is a major question. And why is it good? Because if we are saying that we have to treat every individual equal, it is a moral claim, right? And it needs to be justified on the basis of a moral criteria, which I have not personally found in Buddhism that it can offer. It has anything that it has offered, except the fact that the claim, if I'm not wrong, the claim that we are in a state of ignorance, right? We are living in a state of ignorance that requires us to actually, that makes us behave or live in that ignorance and behave in a certain way that we do, which we need to get away from, because, and we also suffer in this very reality of ignorance that we live in, and we need to get away from that reality. And to do that, we have to get away from all our desires. And when we shun those desires, we attain the state of enlightenment, or we reach the state of enlightenment. And I don't know how human history would have worked out if we had applied that very principle. That is where my issue is with Buddhism.
Well, sorry, I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on this topic. Other voices on this Buddhist topic.
You go ahead.
All right. Yeah, you know what? India. Well, okay. With respect to why, like, India, like, no longer is as like a Buddhist stronghold as it was, I guess it reverted back to being way more like Hindu, and then after a time, like, well, you're obviously from India, if that's correct.
I'm from India, yeah.
Okay, and then it became Mughal, like, practically Muslim for like a good couple of centuries. But like that's why, like, Buddhist was the Buddhist strongholds became more like in China, like in Japan, with like Zen, like Buddhism, and definitely Southeast Asia.
I think that is incorrect, actually. So if you see, there was a period in Indian history where Ashoka the Great, if you look him up, Ashoka the Great, he converted to Buddhism, and he converted India, a good part of India, to Buddhism. The Buddhism that we have in Sri Lanka is because of Ashoka. He sent in missionaries to Thailand, to China. So the Buddhism that we are seeing around the world is because of the missionary work of Ashoka the Great, who converted to Buddhism. So India had a time when Buddhism was flourishing in every sector, but it didn't actually bring, when nation actually stepped into a time of progress, as the rest of the world was, it didn't find.
Japan, for example, is 36% Buddhist. I mean,
yeah,
you could.
But what kind of Buddhism is it?
What kind of Buddhism is practiced in Japan? I was, funny enough,
it's a reformed Buddhism.
Yeah. What?
It's a reformed Buddhism, and it is in no way, if you see, So look at the distinction between the Buddhism that was in India and the Buddhism that is in Japan.
Right.
And if I'm not wrong, they have this notion that they have come to, the whole idea of some sort of divine status to Buddha.
Yeah, but in a way, they review the like Buddhahood as almost like tantamount to like words like divine, although they don't use words like divine. And how Buddhism evolved, like in Japan, definitely is very different to the way it was in Sri Lanka. That was really interesting, like what you said about Oshaka. By the way, I never meant to say that like Buddhism never had a prominent foothold in India.
No, exactly.
It very much did.
So the point here is, so I'm not saying that other worldviews cannot accommodate with where we are in terms of human history and progress and everything. Absolutely. What I'm saying is that if you bring into question ideas that contributed to the world in general, look at Africa. One of the atheists, I have to look it up, if you can do, philosophers, he basically, not philosopher, what's his name? I forgot. He said, Africa needs Christianity. You know, Africa needs Christianity. And much of the development that we talk about today in Indian context happened all because of the educational reform that Christians brought about. No matter what we deny or what we talk about, even today, in the south of India, if you talk about school, the word is pallikudam, the building adjacent to church. School is not called school in south of India. It's called a building adjacent to a church, right? So it's not just the negative that we hear about in terms of what Christian ideas might have done around the world. But I think there's a lot of positive that has happened around the world. And my point was that one of the key ideas that has brought about that positive influence is the idea of dignity being intrinsic. And that was borrowed into a lot of the world, a lot of the cultures around the world to bring about the reforms that we have seen in those nations. Whether their local religions and worldviews provide a foundation for that or not is into question. And what I'm saying is that the idea of Imago Dei from a Christian perspective offers a valid argument in terms of why intrinsic dignity can be upheld as a valuable notion for human progress.
I have a question. You said that you study developing countries, and we've talked, we've mentioned multiple times the idea of progress, advancement, development, and seeing these ideas for how they help attribute that. But what are we defining as that progress? Because you could say, well, progress could be economic progress, but that would probably make China basically the most superior culture in all the world to say that. So what are we looking at when we say progress?
Exactly. Yeah, I think I kind of touched on this, that it depends exactly on the fact that how do we define progress? I would say it's not just in terms of economic progress, which is a fact that economically nations have developed because of what Christianity has offered. Except
for China.
Even with China, they're adopting the vestiges of what Christianity has offered. See, this is what happened when Os Guinness, when he went to China and was talking to an economist there, and he said, "What is with you Western people here? What we're trying to adopt from you, why are you guys shunning it?" This was an economist talking to Os Guinness. I don't know if you know Os Guinness. And he was saying that, it's not that they are prospering purely based on their economic pattern that they have always followed. No, they're adopting a Western framework of a mixed economy, which India is also trying it out, is the whole idea of socialism and capitalism together. And it's working for them. Doesn't mean that right? That has brought about moral transformation of all people or towards good ideas. I'm not questioning Chinese people. I mean, they are very moral people as well within their context. What I'm saying is that within the Indian context, let me say, for example, the idea of dignity, what it has done. It has brought about universal education for all people, not only for Brahmins, okay? It has brought about women's role in governance. It has brought about banning female infanticide. I don't know if you've heard of that. People used to selectively kill girls.
Mm-hmm.
It has brought about end to dowry system. It has brought about end to sati system. I don't know if you know, a woman was actually, she would jump onto the pyre of their dead husband and kill themselves. It has brought about a social system, a social mindset among people to take care of their vulnerable, the poor, orphanages. Even today, most of the orphanages are run by Christians. Most of the educational schools are run by Christians, the good ones, the ones that are really sought out for. Most of the universities are run by Christians. You know, even in India today, let me share this. There are places you can actually book a hotel only if you're upper caste. You can drink from a well only if you're upper caste. If you're a lower caste person, you have to actually give way to people to pass through before you can actually get on that road, same road. If you're on a bike and you see an upper caste person, you're supposed to get down, get your shoes in your hand and walk barefoot. That's happening right now in India. But much has changed. And I attribute much of this change to the moral reform that this idea of intrinsic worth has brought about. And it is worth fighting for an idea that has, and I think this is the same idea that can be implemented and is being implemented around the world. It's too valuable to not fight for. That's what I'm saying. The idea of intrinsic worth of individuals. It's too valuable to not fight for.
No, I certainly believe it. I don't want to dismiss that at all.
So I include those things in progress.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly would. I mean, let me also share this and why this idea is necessary in the American context. And this is something that I was privy to when I was working on my dissertation. You may think that this is only happening in India. No, this is happening right here in our neighborhood. And what am I saying? I actually wrote an article on it. I need to publish it or not. I did my research work on the very concept of the understanding of dignity from a Hindu perspective. And I interviewed quite a few Hindus in the Bay Area for that. There are closer to 300,000 Hindus in the Bay Area. And if you think that when people of other cultures, I'm just giving an example because I come from that context. Mm-hmm. This is not, I'm not picking on any one culture, okay? So just take it as an example. And and there are articles now coming out, so you can look it up on Google as well. Right now in the Bay Area, one of the major problems that was happening was this. There were a lot of Indians who came from India within the context of this dignity being acquired, something that is about status. It is reserved only for few people. Now they came to Bay Area, took up jobs. Good number of them are in managerial jobs where they have to make decisions about appointing people. They have authority and duty to actually bring in more people into the positions that are open and things like that. Now, guess what? When they have two candidates, both of them are qualified, skilled in the work that is required. One belongs to the same caste that this manager is, and the other is not. Who do you think they're appointing? They're appointing the person from their own caste. That is happening right here in the Bay Area, mm-hmm. Right? Think about that. Would you approve that? Would you allow for that because it is coming from a different culture and we shouldn't be actually interfering in another culture? I don't think so. And we can actually fight it only if we truly believe in the fact that there is something called intrinsic worth of all individual. It is not dependent on the basis of the color of their skin. It is not dependent on the basis of the caste that they belong to, right? But the fundamental worldviews do inform public behavior. And that is happening right now here in the Bay Area, not far from where we live.
Well, when you say that the public worldviews influence public behavior, that sounds like you could turn that argument around and say, well, there are countries with public behavior that claim to, where the dominant culture is, I would say the United States, where the dominant culture is the one that is in question. I believe that the example you gave is influenced by public culture, but we have to be careful not to pick and choose and say that, well, this set of actions are people, when people do good in this country, it's because they are being influenced by the dominant culture to do so. And when people do bad, it's when they are going against the dominant culture, and just say that without really looking into it.
Yeah, and I'm not making and you can, and this is, I'm not saying because it's a dominant culture or anything like that. It is theologically informed, philosophically grounded, and experientially lived out, right? So this is something we see every day within the Indian context. This is not just happening in the Bay Area. So when we actually lived out our life in India, my wife and I, we've seen this working out every day.
Oh, I believe it. No, I believe in it. You would say that.
So what I'm saying is that ideas do have consequences, and one of the consequences of the caste system, which basically promotes indignity of the some and the dignity of some, right? Not dignity of all. It's not the intrinsic worth of all people, but some people. That idea is not flourishing. That idea is not good. Would these people who are practicing caste system in the Bay Area right now, if that is going to promote a certain kind of culture that aligns with American progress, is that going to happen? Absolutely not. Even if it happens, it's not a value in itself to be promoted, where you actually judge an individual on the basis of what caste they were born in, or what color they were born in, right? Or what region of the country they were born in. So that's what I'm saying. An individual who had a worldview that would offer them a criteria to judge everyone on the basis of their inherent worth, that is what we need to be promoting. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So worldviews do inform these ideas, and I think Christianity informs the idea of intrinsic worth in a better way.
Wait, you mean better relative to what?
I think he means relative to other religions or other religious doctrines.
In terms of foundation, I would say in terms of foundation, yeah, better than, or explains better than, or grounds better than any other worldview.
Scientology, yeah. I can agree with that.
What?
It's better than Scientology. I can agree with that.
What? How dare you?
Well, guys, it's been a joy to be here, and I really enjoy talking to you.
Thank you so much. Likewise.
Yeah, I know. I apologize for the distraction that was there in between and got disconnected a few times. Sorry about that. I really love talking to you, and I know we can spend the whole night talking about these things. But I firmly believe it's as someone who's coming from outside, have seen the other side of not following the very basic idea, fundamental idea of being created equal. I've seen the outcome of that informing all aspects of life, everything that you do, and seeing that. I'm not saying the West is perfect, no way, but in terms of, I would not be hesitant to say that you do have something valuable here that you need to fight for and preserve and maintain, not just for your own good, but for the good of the world. And it is good to know as to what gives the foundation for that very idea. And that's what I was hoping to share today. So thank you very much for all of your time.
Thanks.
And I'm sure next thing what you're gonna do is watch the presidential debate. So I'm looking forward to.
Only if a Scientologist is running for office.
We basically are.
And so, Jacob, some people wanted notes. So would you be able to send out your notes to people?
I can send it to you, and if you can forward it to everyone, I'll
Okay,
appreciate that.
great. So
And also, please feel free. I love it when people, connect with me, and so if you want to connect with me, feel free to do that on Facebook, and you can know if I'm speaking on any topic that you're interested in. I'd love to have you on. Yeah.
do you still do a podcast?
I do, yeah. So look it up. It's called Equal Justice Podcast on YouTube. So if you go on my Facebook page, you'll find it, Equal Justice. Just look it up on YouTube,
His
and
full
you'll
name
find.
on Facebook is Jacob Daniel.
Yeah.
All
Jane,
right.
you there?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm there. I'm in here. Thank you. I'm not there. I'm here. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. This was a great discussion.
Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, guys, so much. Have a great week.
Have a great week. Yeah.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, there it is.
Are we all leaving? Jane, are you there?
I'm still here. What's up?
Oh, what's up? I watched like half of the video that you sent me. I didn't make it all the way through.
Oh yeah, it was a pretty long one. I usually, when I watch stuff on YouTube, I double up the speed so I get through a lot more videos.
Oh, why did I do that? Yeah, I guess I know that trick, but I forgot to do it. I did want to talk about it, but it is getting late. So maybe we can remember next time to go over it, and maybe I'll try to finish it.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Cool. You guys have a good night.
Take care.
Thanks. See you.